Welcome to Wagon Wheel. I am your host, Jarrod Kimber. Thank you for joining me. I completely forgot what I was going to say. What was I going to say? I'm still Jarrod Kimber. I'm pretty sure of that thing. Yeah, Spotify Green Room. If you want to join us for any of these live chats, you can. I put out the links usually on Twitter, but if you follow us on Spotify Green Room, you actually get the a notification as well. We put them up on Instagram stories, and if you're a Patreon subscriber, you have access to them via our Discord page. But huge thanks to everyone again for popping into this particular chat. We realize if you're following the podcast on YouTube, we have not been as diligent as we perhaps should have been with getting all the Wagon Wheel episodes up, but we're going to try and make sure that we get them on time and up as much as possible. Obviously, they're probably the most timely thing that we do. So sorry about that if you're on YouTube and you're just like, dude, you're like 8 episodes behind, but we will catch up and we will work that one out. Huge shout out to all the supporters. Obviously, Manscaped, if you use the code REDINKER, all one word, you get 20% off Manscaped. And what better way to shave your testicles than with Manscaped? I mean, there may be other ways. I don't know. But, well, there are other ways, aren't there? But they're not as safe and they're not as good. They're not as, designed for the curvatures and the wrinkles. I don't really know how Manscaped do it, but they seem to do a very good job from what I can tell. Thanks again to Bodyline T-shirts as well. And just obviously to people who support us via Buy Me a Coffee, but most of all to our Patreons. Just huge just huge thanks to them. This podcast is completely exists because of Patreon. Obviously, we're looking at getting more sponsors and doing more partnerships with other companies going forward. But at the moment, the reason that we can afford to do a second podcast a week is because of Patreon. So because of that, we allow the patrons from Patreon, I don't know, to ask the first questions on this. If you go to the first class or above in a level of tiers, there's also heaps of other things, like we've got an AMA going on in the Patreon window at the moment. For higher level, you get access to chats, and you also get the podcasts before they go public, and also without ads. Let's start with Satchmo, who says, if you could go back in time and watch any great innings live, which would it be? Ooh, there's a really interesting one that I read a lot about I'm trying to think of the year. Was it 1907, 1908? When Aubrey Faulkner made a great 100. It was a big deal for a South African to make 100 in Australia. And everyone was like, actually, it might be a double 100. He made a double 100. And everyone was like, oh, this is awesome. How good's this guy? And Victor Trumper, it's almost like being at a music festival and watching someone do something great and going out and putting in an extra performance, came out and just absolutely smoked him. And they had this incredible relationship too, where Aubrey Faulkner was obviously an incredible player, and he bought a bat from Victor Trumper, and he didn't know how to tell Victor Trumper that the bat he'd sold him wasn't particularly good. And so eventually sort of went up to him and said, look, Victor, I'm really sorry, but this bat is not the bat I was hoping it would be. And Victor Trumper's like, oh, I'll have a go. Victor Trumper took to the nets and hit everything out the middle and said, I think it's fine. I think what you realize at that point is that Victor Trumper was on another level to even other great players of his era. So to be able to watch that would be incredible. There was a great innings that Leary Constantine played for the West Indies against Middlesex at Lords, which is, an incredibly famous innings, and in some ways maybe changed the way that people thought about West Indies cricket. I think it was before they were a test playing nation as well, but I'm not sure. I couldn't be completely sure about that. Those are two. There's also one that I've actually seen a lot of highlights of, but the double 100 that Garfield Sobers made for the World 11 at the MCG. My dad was there that day, and the way he talks about it, but even looking at the highlights, I would have absolutely loved to be able to watch that particular innings. So there's 3 off the top of my head. I'm trying to think if there's any other great older ones. I suppose some of Bradman's innings as well. Like, we see the highlights and you can sort of piece together what he did, but it would be great to be able to go back and watch him, and maybe even Hobbs as well, and try and work out exactly what they were doing that other batters of their eras weren't doing. Sandeep says, Kagiso Rabada was brilliant in the second test match versus New Zealand. Do you think he has reached his peak with the red ball, or can he get even better? Well, I find it really interesting, Sandeep, that because everyone's got so much better at bowling, Rabada's probably not getting the credit that he deserves. He's been incredible for a very, very long time, but even within his own team, you got Enric Nokia coming through. And there's always, another South African bowling talent sort of who comes in, takes a bunch of wickets and disappears or something. There always seems to be a different story to him. And you've got Ngidi and Siplama there as well, who, I think Siplama's a very, very good test bowler. It'd be really interesting to see how he goes in the next part of his career. So it always feels to be another story around Rabada. But he's been bombing people for a very, very long time. I'm not sure if he's reaching a new peak. I think this is pretty much what he does. He takes wickets at an incredibly low rate. What I really want to see now is him with that bowling attack for a long time as they build it around it. He's got better spin backup than probably Dale Steyn ever got. He doesn't have the all-round backup that Steyn had. But you do. I think what you do have at that point is certainly I'm trying to think of the best way of putting it. But I think what you have at that point is we're really going to see how good he is over the next couple of years. We already know he's had one of the best starts of his career that any bowler ever has. I'm not sure that there's a new peak for him to get to, but it's really whether he can just maintain this for a long period of time, or whether he's going to be, I suppose, more like a Wacker Yunus bowler who had a great peak, but then, he can't maintain it because of his body, which is possible. It could happen to Rabada as well. But I include Yunus, even though they're very different bowlers, in that they're both incredible when it comes to strike rates. And it's very hard to keep up a very low strike rate consistently. Although if you're going to do it, South Africa is the place to do it. And I think Dale Steyn probably proves that quite well. Johnny says, can you explain why spin away from the bat is so much more effective than spin towards the bat in white ball cricket? Well, it's in all cricket, realistically. The basic reason, and it's not just spin, it's also seam bowling as well, is that the ball's going away from your eye line. So if it's pitching on off stump, and it's moving away, it's moving further away from you, which means that you're not as... I'm doing this for the video. That doesn't help because I've completely gone away from the microphone. But it means that your head can't get completely on top of the ball. When the ball's coming into you, more often than not, your head is completely on top of it unless you fall over a little bit, which is why they talk about that a lot. So in one case, the ball's coming into your eye line, and in the other case, it's going away from your eye line. I would say that is the basic thing. Well, I haven't ever seen any great science on it, but I would assume that is the basic reason. And also, if you think about it if you've ever played a sport like tennis, when you play tennis, the ball comes back into you, it cramps up, but you don't miss it that often, right? When the ball swings away from you in tennis, you're more likely to miss it. And so I think there's something there about that probably plays for cricket as well. I've never had a look at the numbers for baseball, so I'm not exactly sure how they go across. Ray says, Women's World Cup, can Australia... Can anyone knock Australia off at the top? I'm thinking New Zealand or South Africa, hoping more. Ray is from South Africa. And India can provide some fireworks. Well, New Zealand obviously beat Australia in the warm-up game. South Africa, if you look at the piece I did, Ray, you'll see that I had a look at the odds. South Africa's 14-1. They've had the second best form. I think that the thought from the bookies is that their form is probably better than it should be because they haven't been beaten by Australia like everyone else has. They haven't played Australia in that run. And so we don't really know how good South Africa is. I think we're getting a really good idea of how good New Zealand is. It's a warm-up game, and I'm not worried about that. I make a comparison to the Australian women's cricket team at the moment. It's a bit like the USA basketball team. The men's team lost in some of their warm-ups before the Olympics. Those things happen. They were still by far the best team at the Olympics. I would expect the Australian women's team to still be the best team at this World Cup. That said, I think of recent times, I think maybe some of the other teams, because they've had the focus of the World Cup, have been a little bit more on it. But the Australian women are absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't expect them to lose, but it would take an incredible effort. And if I was going to put my money on anyone, I put my money on South Africa because I think their odds are really good. But if I was, realistically, I think New Zealand might be the sneaky one to come through. Not to mention India and England as well, which I think we're in a great place that we have a legitimate World Cup where 5 teams can win it. And we also have Bangladesh, who have obviously improved a lot of recent times. West Indies have made a World Cup semi-final, final, and obviously the Pakistan team. I wish we had more teams, and there's a new video actually coming out, which will probably be out if by the time you listen to this podcast, about the Sri Lankan women and what's happened with them. Irish women as well. Obviously, the Thai women are coming through more so in the T20 cricket. But it's a really, really exciting time for women's cricket. Sadly, I probably won't be able to see much of this tournament because New Zealand hours don't really suit me in the UK, and I'll be covering Australia, Pakistan, and also England, West Indies. So I probably won't see as much as I want, but I tried to get a couple of videos out early on, and hopefully, if I can cover a little bit more of the game, I will. Some of the games, I will. Christopher says, why do teams announce their lineup days in advance? Even if it's the smallest marginal gain, I really don't see why teams do it. Surely teams even announcing their batting order plays into opposition's hands. Christopher, you're speaking to, no one who does analysis in cricket can get behind this. In T20 cricket, you almost never see it. And even when captains say it sometimes, it's never true. Like they've got it wrong or something changes between the time they've said it and the next game. International teams doing this, I think it's more almost like a throwback to the old days. It's also in cricket. The journalists really, I don't know why this is the case. I've always said that the cricket 11 is slightly different than maybe the starting 11 in football or starting 5 in basketball or some other team sports. We're always so desperate to know who is in and out of the team. In some cases, I think they do it to stop the leaks of who is in the team. But from a tactical point of view, I'm with you. I've had a fight about this with an international cricketer recently where he was like, but it's such a marginal game, blah, blah, blah. And I said, but it's a marginal game, right? Like not telling... I wrote about this with the Devon Conway a while back. And a lot of cricketers got in touch saying, as if England hadn't done their research on Devon Conway. But the way that I put it was, if you say 3 or 4 days out, Devon Conway is definitely playing, it means that every time Jimmy Anderson or Stuart Broad or whoever the bowlers are in that particular game are doing their research, they're literally doing their research based on knowing he's going to play. That is hugely different from doing your research on, let's say, 7 or 8 players, and you're not sure which 6 are going to be picked in the top 6, right? There's a big difference there. And if you've got a player playing his first game, any little advantage you can give him, I think is ideal. It didn't matter for Devon Conway, obviously. He did okay. But yeah, I'm completely with you. I think it does sort of go back to the sort of, especially the traveling media, the way that it kind of works, that cycle. But I certainly would never want to be part of a cricket team where we were telling the opposition who our 11 was going to be coming in. I don't really see what the point is. Also, if you do make that decision and then the pitch is slightly different on the day, haven't you haven't painted yourself in, but it makes it look like you're making a panic decision where you're not really making a panic decision. So yeah, I think that bothers me. Satchmo says, does an all-time Australia Test 11 need to include players who open the batting during their careers? Or would it not be better to simply pick the best 6 batters, regardless of the position, and tell 2 of them to open? No, I think if you're doing that, I think there's a difference between saying these are the best 11 players of all time, and for one country that might be like 10 batters and 1 bowler, right? So if you look at Sri Lanka, it might be like Vas, Murali, and then a bunch of batters, right? That's a different thing. If you're picking the best 11, you specifically want to pick the best openers. So I think in that particular case, you would pick great openers. And, in Australia's case, that's not a problem. And then you say, does an all-time West Indies 11 need to have a specialist spinner? I don't think it needs to have a specialist spinner because in that case, it's a little bit different. That said, Lance Gibbs is a very unlucky person to miss out on that. He once held the world record for the most wickets, was an incredible player. Almost impossible to hit off the square. Is he in their best 7 or 8 bowlers? Probably not, though, right? So I think in that particular case, it's a little bit different because we also know that West Indies won a lot of Test matches without a specialist spinner. If they're a team that always picked a spinner automatically, I think that would be a harder sell. But in that particular case, I think it's fine. And as you say, Sobers is in there to bowl spin, although let's not pretend that Sobers' spin was anything like Lance Gibbs' spin. But Sobers was, a very, very handy spinner. James says you've made allusions to the diminishing even role of medium pace swing bowlers, Alex Bedses, Bob Massey's, Derek Pringles, Alderman. Watch your video on Akshar Patel, a bowler who, by your analysis, has forgone flight in favour for angle, crease pinning pace, almost like a long-limbed Derek Underwood. Yeah, without the with a different kind of advantage from the pitches. But yeah, that's fair. So you're asking why medium pacers couldn't use these sorts of skills. It's not that medium pacers couldn't use these kind of skills, but if a medium pacer can work that out, why can't a fast medium pacer work it out? Why can't a medium fast bowler, or a fast medium, or a fast bowler work those skills out? And I think that's the thing that is holding back medium-paced bowlers specifically. I still think there's always going to be, well, I don't think there's always going to be a place for them, but I think there's a place for them in a long time when you see, the skill of Muhammad Abbas, or even I suppose Bhuvi Kumar. I'm trying to think, Vernon Philander. The actual skill of those people is still better than the skill of players at the other end. However, we will get medium fast medium bowlers who can do that, and Bhuvi might even be probably more towards that end already, right? Who will have those same skills. And I think that we're already starting to see through slower balls and now through the wobble ball that faster bowlers are picking up skills at a rate that they didn't particularly have to. I wouldn't have thought that Shoaib Akhtar or Sean Tate were particularly skillful bowlers. Steve Harmison, again, there wasn't that they were unskillful bowlers, and that they actually, in some ways, had to learn other skills and were very good at certain things. But comparing them to very high-skilled, medium-paced bowlers, they probably weren't in the same league. I think now we're seeing more crossover. I mean, Jimmy Anderson's probably another crossover. He's now medium-fast, but he did a lot of the highly skillful stuff as fast-medium, which means that the people who bowl between 75 and 85 miles an hour consistently, I think they're just going to struggle to get picked. I don't think that they'll struggle to pick up wickets at first-class cricket. And also, as we're seeing the Neil Wagner era of bouncing people in the middle overs, you cannot do that with someone bowling, 78 miles an hour. Even Neil Wagner's pace is, vastly superior to that. So it's a really good question, James. But I think that what you're talking about, and I think you mentioned it further on, like the Colin Miller type, we might actually see people who do that, but then you're really talking more Mustafizur Rahman, Bob Appleyard. Those aren't medium pacers really at that point. They're really fast spinners. That is something that I think we will see more of, because I think it'll come through T20 cricket, and then those skills should be able to be transferred to pace bowling. If you have a look at what Lance Klusner managed to do bowling cutters, and we've seen some great, bowlers bowling, faster cutters in test matches at times. I think that's an underbowled skill. That might come through those medium pace guys, but eventually it will be taken over by the faster guys anyway. Ian says, is Chris Woakes the player under the most pressure going into the West Indies and England series this month? Yeah, absolutely. He's using the Duke's ball. He's going up against a weak West Indian batting lineup on very friendly pitches. If he comes back and he hasn't taken a good percentage of wickets per game at a decent average, I think that might be the end of the Chris Woakes bowls overseas experiment, sadly. I still think his record is worse than it should be overseas, but I think I might have done this in a recent video. I can't imagine that Chris Woakes is ever going to go on such a run in overseas cricket where he's ever going to be able to pull those numbers back. What's the best case scenario? He plays for another 3 or 4 years and he ends up averaging between 35 and 40 overseas. England's still going to want more if they're going to win overseas. And I still believe that Chris Woakes is a fantastic cricketer, and I don't understand why he's been so unsuccessful, but he has been. And at a certain point, I think we have to go with the fact that he hasn't been able to take wickets consistently overseas. Certainly, if he doesn't take them in this environment of this next series, you'd have to be like, thanks, Chris. We love your batting. We love your fielding. We love you. Everyone loves Chris Woakes. But, maybe time to move on. Thanks to everyone there for Patreon. That was great. Let's get some questions in the chat. Dio, you've got mute on.
Hello, Jarrod.
How you doing? What's your question?
So I wanted to ask about Ashwin. I've been watching cricket since 2013. So I don't know about our previous spinners. I'm from India. So I wanted to know how good Ashwin is actually to compare to our spinners. It's more of a request.
He's probably, I mean, to give you a proper answer, I'd have to really go through the numbers. I think struggle to find a better spinner than Ashwin at home and away over a long period of time. I think obviously Bisham Beatty was absolutely incredible. You look back to Chandrasekhar when he was at his best, was maybe even again better than Ashwin away from home, but whether we saw that consistently or not. Anil Kumble certainly struggled away from home. Harbhajan Singh again struggled away from home. Anil Kumble is, I think, a world great. I think Harbhajan's obviously an Indian great. I'm trying to think throughout the history of Indian spinners if there's been anyone else. Jadeja's obviously right up there now. Jadeja has a good case to be if not the best left-arm finger spinner of all time, then certainly in that conversation. But I think for me, off the top of my head, I would say that Ash is the best Indian spinner that I have ever seen. And I think looking at the records, I would find it hard to think that anyone else has ever been better than him. But I'd have to do a really deep dive into that. But that would be my thought process. Weird things have happened as well because he's played in an era where there's been more left-handers and there's been DRS. What would some of the Indian spinners have done previously if they'd had better matchups to bowl against and DRS to back that up with, right? So we don't know that, and we can't. But if you're just looking based on era, I just find it hard. I mean, I saw him bowl in Australia in 11, 12, and I just thought this, and I'd seen Harath bowl in Australia, and I'd seen Murali bowl in Australia, and I think Swan had bowled in Australia. I just thought that Ashwin was incredible then on another level. And I was surprised me though when India just kept dropping him. And he got dropped, I think, because of that tour. And I thought he bowled magnificently in Australia on that tour. And he didn't play much away from home after that. And I think that maybe stunted his development, but also maybe it's also allowed him to have a slightly better record away from home, right? Like when he was learning the game, he didn't have to do as much work away from home as maybe some of the other Indian spinners did. Certainly someone like Harbhajan, who probably played a lot away from home early on in his career when he was still developing as a player. But for me, I would think that Ashwin, longevity, and ability to bowl at home and away is the best Indian spinner I know of. But without doing a deep dive, I'm just going off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. Thank you. Joseph Matthew.
Hi, Jarrod.
How you doing? What's your question?
I watched your previous era T20 11. I just wanted to know what do you think will the Indian spin quartet do if they were to play T20 cricket?
So you're talking about the quartet from the 60s and 70s?
Yes.
Well, Chandrasekhar, I suppose, is maybe one of the closest bowlers to Rashid Khan. I suppose him, maybe Tiger Bill O'Reilly. There aren't that many. If you watch old clips of Clary Grimmett, you'd be shocked at how slow Clary Grimmett bowled, whereas Tiger Bill O'Reilly and Chandrasekhar are a lot quicker. So I would assume that with that, Chandrasekhar would be brilliant. Bisham Beatty, it would be really interesting to see how he would develop his game for T20. I think who was it? Someone tweeted out a video of him. I know Simon Kerrigan, the England spinner, retweeted it, and a couple of my spinning, fellow nerds was sending it through to me when we were having a look at it. He bowled so slow. I would say he bowled considerably slower than Nathan Lyon, for instance, which was obviously quite common in that era of spin bowling. Unless you were the sort of faster bowl into the wet wickets type spinner, you did bowl quite slow. But had such control of the ball and the batter that I think he would have got away. But I don't know if there's a modern... Maybe we'd have to look at some of the success that Harath did. I don't think Harath was quite as good a bowler as Bisham Beatty, but maybe on a similar level. And I think we saw at times Harath absolutely ripped through T20, but we didn't probably see the most of him at T20. Most of the other left-arm finger spinners we've seen have been sort of, Imad Wasim types and, Krunal Pandya types and even Jadeja type bowler. I don't think Beatty would have gone down that path. But but it'd be really interesting. It really would be interesting to see what he would have done. Who've we got? Venkat. I think Venkat, my memory was that he had a very low economy rate. I assume he would probably be quite suited to limited overs cricket because of that, and that people struggle to get him away. I know he attacked a lot in first-class cricket, took a lot of wickets in first-class cricket, but I would have thought in T20 cricket he would have been a stopper. And who am I missing? I'm missing a spinner here, aren't I?
Prasanna.
Oh, Prasanna. I would have thought Prasanna would have been a bit more like Ashwin, in that there would have maybe been a lot of experimentation and trying to find what he was best at. I would have thought that, yeah, that I don't know if he would have gone quite as far as Ashwin into the experimentation world, but I would have thought that Prasanna would have. I think he would have tried to remain to be a wicket-taking option, but while coming up with extravagant ways to occasionally keep the economy rate down. Yeah, he would have been very, very fascinating what he would have done with his lines, from remembering the way that he bowled. But yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that was one of the things that how these different players would have, so I picked Jim Fote for my fielder. But another player that I think would have been really, really interesting in T20 cricket would have been West Indies' Roger Harper, who was obviously like the West Indies' permanent 12th man, one of the best fielders, if not the best fielder in the world for a long period of time, could bat a little bit and bowled sort of almost Johan Botha type off spin. It would have been a fantastic T20 cricketer. I think there's a lot of guys who played, who were successful in different eras of Test cricket. It'll be interesting to see what they would have done. But thanks so much.
Thank you, Jarrod.
Are you there?
Yep. Hey, Jed, how are you?
Not too bad. What's your question?
So my question is, something that I noticed quite often is that right-arm bowlers don't often come around the wicket to left-arm batsmen. And, or it's seen as a more of a defensive tactic after they are done with it, like with over the wicket, and they're not able to get the wicket or the batsman is set.
What format are you talking about here?
Test.
Yeah,
I don't think ODIs or T20s they do that much either, but especially in tests, if I notice, it reminds me of this test in India versus South Africa when Bumrah was trying to come over the wicket continuously and trying to get that edge when he could have tried his Yorker, which could have been difficult for the lower order batsman. So, but I remember Zaheer Khan used to do that a lot to Graham Smith, where he used to come around the wicket and get him out a lot. So,
but Zaheer Khan's a left-arm bowler bowling around the wicket to a left-hand batter. That's completely different.
If you could differentiate or help with that.
Well, that's massively different. That's like a right-arm bowler coming around the wicket to a right-hand batter. Is that what you're talking about? Or a left-hand batter?
No, left-hand batter itself and a right-arm bowler. I know. Zaheer is left-arm bowler, but
so I mean, in the last, I can't remember when it started, but I wrote about this in 2019. Sid Monger's written about it. Katsuke has written about it. Basically, from about 2017 onwards, bowlers went more than doubled the amount of times they bowled around the wicket to left-handers. It's completely changed. I'm actually quite shocked you're asking this question, because there's never been a time in the history of Test cricket when people have bowled around the wicket to left-handers more than they do now. It's massively so. If you go back to 90s cricket, a couple of bowlers were specialists and liked to do it, and a couple of batters were seen as weak when you did that. But as a general rule, the only time you bowled around the wicket to a left-hander was when he'd already made 80 and you'd run out of options and you came around the wicket. Whereas now you've got Kemar Roach, Stuart Broad. I'm trying to think some of the other specialists. There's a couple of others who are absolute specialists at coming around the wicket to left-handers and almost never come over the wicket to right-handers at all. I think Kemar Roach at one stage was up to 87% of the time bowling around the wicket to left-handers for a period and was unplayable when he was doing it. The Australians are getting into it as well. Bumrah has done it. I'm trying to think. Siraj has done it, although Siraj sometimes comes over the wicket as well. But yeah, there's more of right-arm bowlers coming around the wicket to left-handers than there's ever been. Partly that's because there are less right-arm bowlers who take the ball away from a right-hander or take the ball into a left-hander now than ever before. And because of that, if you can take the ball away from a left-hander, the absolute best angle is to angle the ball in at them and take it away, a bit like a left-arm finger spinner bowling to a right-hander. So we've never seen more. I'd say, I've done a video on it actually. I'd say that the reason we've seen more of it is because of analysis and because of coaching. So essentially what happened was analysts kept saying, this guy's not very good when you come around the wicket, but bowlers kept saying, well, I don't know how to do it. And I've had this before. I've had this conversation with a bowler before. And I said, it's not good enough to tell me you don't know how to do it. You've got a bowling coach there. It's your job to go. And so I, linked him up with a bowling coach, and then you help them actually develop that skill. So, yeah, it's huge, the amount of times that we've seen it in, I would say around 2017 was the first time.
Okay, I'll keep a more keen eye on it.
No worries. Cheers, mate. Bye. Hydrogen X. Hydrogen X. I think you need to take your mute off, Hydrogen X.
Hello.
How you doing, Hydrogen X? How can I help you?
Hello.
Yep, I'm ready. What's your question?
So my question was that basically in the recently starting from I think 8th March, England West Indies series, and it's practice matches going on, and Johnny Bairstow again scored 100, I think. So what do you think about the future of wicket keepers of England? That will they give the role to Johnny Bairstow permanently? What do you think about the wicket keeping of John?
Long term, I have no idea, because I mean, if everyone keeps failing to make runs, they're just going to keep rotating through people, aren't they? My guess is Josh Butler will not continue to play. That's just a guess. I think he might have even played his last test, or he might play in England this summer. I don't know, but I wouldn't be massively surprised if Josh Butler moved away from Test cricket. I think their first thought is to go back to Bairstow. But obviously, Woakes is the other option there. I just think that they believe, probably rightly, that Bairstow is a much better batter than Woakes. Although Woakes has done quite well in Test cricket, the majority of his runs have come down the order, whereas Bairstow also gives them the option of playing someone higher up in the order if they need to. So my guess is that they would try and make it work with Bairstow, who, if you look at county cricket, I think is still the most dominant batter over the last 5 years or something, and by a long distance. So I would have assumed that they would go back to Bairstow first, and go with him. But then, maybe have Woakes as a specialist in Asia, or if Bairstow is averaging low 30s or high 20s, they might just go with Woakes.
Yes, so they I also think that Ben Fox is currently the best wicket keeper that England has. But when you play Fox, you essentially have to play him at 7. And recently, Ben Stokes has also not been pulling up that well. So if Ben Stokes doesn't return to his previous bowling, then how do you look at it?
Yeah, if Ben, well, now that they don't have Moeen Ali or Ben Stokes, that does change things. I don't think they would be, well, in certain environments, they might try Woakes at 6. Whether they would do that consistently is fair, but also I doubt that Ben Stokes is ever not going to bowl consistently as well. So it might be a situation that doesn't flare up as much as you would think it would. But you're right. In that case, then Bairstow makes more sense, and that's why Bairstow will be their first thought. Bairstow just gives them extra flexibility. Plus, for everything that's going on in Bairstow's career, it would, even if you say Bairstow's not good enough to play Test cricket and make runs consistently, which so far, by his numbers is correct, he might still be in England's best, 4 batters. And if that's the case, it makes sense to squeeze him into the side with the gloves more so than Woakes, who brings other problems. Thanks for your question, mate. Dipesh, you there? Oh dear. Don't know what percentage of these lives is just hosts going, why can't I hear this person? I've now got Dipesh twice, and he still disappeared on me. Oh my! All right. Antas, you there?
Hi, Jarrod.
Antas, how you doing? What's your question?
So I'm recently getting interested in cricket finances, and I tried to look into it, but I don't understand. Like I know how the BCCI and the other counterparts of it make money, but where does this money go apart from what they spend in building up the stadiums or whatever, paying salaries at the spending at grassroots levels? But are there any shareholders? I can't find any information. Who makes money off BCCI? Who gets rich?
Great question. Very good question. I would like to understand it too, and I've been following this for 13 years. Where does the money go? So much money seems to go in, so little money seems to come out. I mean, realistically, they could have 10 state-of-the-art training facilities for women, a fully professional women's setup with the money that they're getting and with the money that they're supposedly outlaying. And I don't know where the money goes. I've heard, you hear things like the BCCI sitting on cash of $6 to $8 billion. I don't know even if that's true, right? But where is all this money? They seem to be making so much money, and I don't ever know where it goes. It's certainly not going on players' salaries. It's certainly not going on ground construction. It's certainly not going on training facilities. I think it's one of the great questions. So, sadly, I think there's only about 3 or 4 cricket boards who actually really open up their finances in a professional way, and we just don't know where the money goes. But there's no shareholders. I would say that there are probably some local boards who are getting more money than they should be. But again, I don't know. It just feels like me. They make these billions of dollars through the IPL and through their international cricket, and then it disappears. And I don't know if they're sitting on this incredible reserve, which at this stage I don't think they need to. Like, if let's say that's true, and I have no idea whether it is or not, surely you just take $8 billion and you within 2 years have the best women's team that's ever existed, right? Not even maybe 100 million, 50 million. So I'm with you. It doesn't make any sense when you look into the finances. But I think you'll find if you're looking at India, I think you look at a lot of these boards. The Zimbabwe money thing is terrifying. There's a lot of places where money seems to go in, and then we don't really know how it is spent. And I don't think that is fair to the cricket fans, because we're the reasons these boards have money, right? We should know where our streaming, our ticket sales, our shirt sales, our, I don't know, however else we buy our TV rights, all that sort of stuff we pay for. That's how they get rich. And then they don't have the, they don't show us. And I don't think that's good enough. And I've never thought that's good enough. But, after a while, I probably just stopped looking.
I just have one follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know any way, do you have any information where can we watch Death of a Gentleman in India? I can't find it on any streaming platforms and such.
Well, Death of the Gentleman is, what year are we in? It's almost 7 years old now. And as you can imagine, from most documentaries, they don't have a huge shelf life. So we had about 4 years on Netflix, maybe about 4 years on Amazon Prime. And when those contracts ran out, they decided not to re-up the documentary. I think at that time, Amazon Prime were getting The Test, and Netflix was getting the Mumbai documentary. So they probably thought that they had some cricket content coming through and they didn't need our tiny little documentary. As far as I'm aware now, the only legal, I'm not even sure there's a legal way to watch it in India anymore, if we're being completely honest. So I would assume now that the easiest way to watch it is probably through some sort of dark web. I think when you're going to the dark web to find your heroin, at that stage you should look for Death of a Gentleman as well. I'm not saying Antas, you personally use heroin, but if you were to purchase heroin, it would be next to that. Thanks for your question, mate. William, you there?
Yeah, hi, Jarrod. I am.
What's your question, mate?
So I read your piece on Jimmy and Broad getting booted in Test team. People should subscribe to your Substack if they don't already.
You're right.
Do you think that we, England, have got a chance in the West Indies? I think we'll lose, perhaps 2-1, but I don't know whether you would care to make a prediction in advance of the Test series.
I think England should still win that series, even without Jimmy and Broad. I understand why you would be. Well, this is the thing. I don't think. I really, on those pitches, the bowling attack that you're taking over should be able to take 20 wickets in a Test match against on those pitches.
Chris Woakes notwithstanding.
Away Chris Woakes with a Duke's ball on helpful pitches is not away Chris Woakes in an Ashes Test or in South Africa or in Asia, right? Like, if he's ever going to take wickets away from home, it should be this Test series. He should take 18 wickets in this series, right? And he may not, because as you've said, away Chris Woakes does weird things, and no one's ever liked to be in the UK more than Chris Woakes apparently. But realistically, he should take wickets. Robinson should be unplayable. We've seen Mark Wood be good at times overseas. Saqib Mahmood, I think, would be a really good bowler against a West Indian batting lineup on those sorts of pitches as well. We don't know what Parkinson will do, but we do know at times the West Indians, have problems with wrist spin if he plays, of course. But you've also got to look at who are the West Indian batters that you're afraid of, right? I mean, it's been bad. In fact, when I finish this, the next thing I'm going to be doing is writing a piece up on batting in the West Indies. It's been terrible. They don't have really any locked-in batters. If you remember last time, they beat England with their number 6 and 7. Holder and Dowrich really, were a big part of why they won that particular series. Shai Hope's been struggling against pace bowling. Hetmeyer probably won't play. Puran, they're probably not ready to take that punt on yet. Brathwaite,
John Campbell revival.
I mean, the thing is that you might see someone like that. Jermaine Blackwood will play, if he plays, will play one good innings, because he always does against England. The man is obsessed. But realistically, it's a bad batting lineup, and the pitches are really spicy, and you're using a Duke's ball, right? Realistically, England have a great chance of winning even without their best team. But, I mean, if I was an England fan, I'd probably, prefer to have Jimmy and Broad go for this particular series, because it's a bit like when you see this in baseball and basketball all the time, when you're playing a team and you kind of want to rest your best players, but you're doing it against, you're creating what should be let's say England with their best team is a 55% chance of winning this series, right? If you're not playing your best players, is it closer to 50-50 now? Like, you're making it more of a contest than it needs to be. And I think that's what England's doing. But I certainly think that with their bowling, they should be able to still win this series. But it's very possible that the England bowlers have an absolutely great series and they still lose. Because we already know that the West Indies bowlers will probably have a great series, and we know how England's batting goes. So it's very, very possible that that happens as well.
I just think there's a certain irony that Broad and Anderson didn't play that much in the Ashes because we had to keep resting them, and then we just booted them at the end of the series, and now they're not available at all, where we could use.
Say what you will, they're incredibly well rested at the moment. Thanks for your question, mate. Where are we? Oh, he's back. Dipesh? Oh, here he is. How you doing? What's your question?
Hi. So my question is that, so going ahead now, it's a two-part question. So first is going ahead towards the T20 World Cup, Women's World Cup. Who do you think are the favorites for the T20 Women's World Cup? And also the Pakistan versus Australia series, which is going to begin. And because everything is skeptical, nobody knows how the pitch is. Even the Pakistanis, they're not really open about it, how the pitch is going to behave or anything like that. So who are you backing for both these tournaments? I mean, one is a tournament and one is a series.
You're talking about the Women's One Day World Cup that starts today in 24 hours.
Sorry, yes, sorry, 1 day earlier.
Yeah. You said T20, and I was like, does he want me to throw ahead? Women's World Cup. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen in a World Cup a team more favoured than the Australians. I'd love to give you a hot take about how New Zealand or South Africa or England or India or, I don't know, West Indies or Pakistan were going to win that tournament. I don't have it in me. I think there's a chance that one of them upsets Australia in the group games. And I also think it's a chance that one of them, gets lucky in the knockouts. But realistically, you'd have to have just bumped your head quite hard to think that anyone other than Australia would win. In Australia, Pakistan, as you said, the pitches we don't know. When I did my World Chess Championship, preview, where I had a look at who the most likely teams are based on the schedules to make the finals. I had Pakistan in the final, and I had them winning this series, I think, 2-1. Certainly, at least, or even 2-0. I'd have to go back and check. So I would be thinking that Pakistan should win that series. Australia have not been away from home in a very long time, and they're not been very good away from home for a very long time. I think just based on that, you would assume that Pakistan at home should be the better team. Having said that, I think anytime Australia has such a good bowling unit that a bit like South Africa is almost like the cheap version of Australia at the moment, where you're just like, I think them winning series consistently would be really, really tough. But South Africa is going to win a lot of tests because their bowlers are going to just rip through teams. And I think Australia's is a bit similar. How that translates to Pakistan is obviously a little bit trickier. But I do think that they have a chance of winning some tests. They might even win 2 of the tests. But I would think that Pakistan quite rightly deserve to be favourites. And I don't think I've seen anything. There's no way I could give Australia the upper hand because we haven't seen them away from home in such a long time in test matches. And so and winning, that it would be impossible to say that they're going to beat Pakistan. But they could run them close. Thanks for your question.
Got it.
More questions? Tom. Oh, Tom, there he is.
How you doing, mate?
I'm good. What's your question?
So I was thinking the other day, we're seeing a growth in franchise cricket. We're seeing auctions coming through and people being a bit more choosy about the players they're recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, maybe this is going on behind the scenes and we're not privy to it. You see all these splashy releases about signing star players. But do you think we're going to see an increase in kind of Moneyball in cricket and people saying, look, we want openers who are capable of doing, specific things rather than just being a flashy name who could come in and score hundreds. We want guys who can tick very specific boxes as part of the game plan.
Look, we've already seen it. Benny Howe played in the Bangladesh Premier League, PSL, and is obviously on an IPL roster as well. He's the unflashiest name in the world. So much so that it held him back for a long time. I think that there is certainly still... So even if you've got Moneyball, right? So we had a situation at St. Lucia where we wanted a left-hander for the middle order, and I came up with a lot of different options. And then David Warner became available. Now, we knew that David Warner was going to open the batting. Moneyball or not, I could tell you that was going to cause a huge problem for us because we already had too many openers. But when you go back to the owner, it's David Warner, right? And also, on a Moneyball perspective, if I was to go through the numbers, it'd be like, probably David Warner could have batted at 3 and 4, which in fact he ended up batting at 4 for us, hilariously, which shows how bad our season went. But there are a lot of owners. You got to remember at the moment too, American sports was at a much more mature stage when Moneyball took over. Basketball and baseball, and now the NFL as well. All those 3 sports were very, very mature. People who own those teams, some people still own them as an addition, but a lot of people own them to get more capital to buy more teams, right? So, you have people buy teams in America so they can buy Premier League, and eventually so they can buy IPL teams. And, you have someone like the Cronkies who, own a different team in a different city for a different sport over and over again, right? You get these sorts of things happen. They're trying to build equity in their teams, and so they're trying to make their teams more successful. And then you even get owners in America like, the owners of the Dallas Cowboys or the LA Lakers, who, like, that's almost their entire business, right? At this point, is owning sports teams. We haven't had anything really that close to that in T20 franchises. You do get some people, like I suppose Rajasthan might be one of the closest, where the owners were getting it as a business. But a lot of the people who own these teams are owning them as what I call, they're almost hobby teams, right? So when I worked in St. Lucia and CPL, it's quite clear that a lot of the owners didn't really care that much. They just wanted a couple of weeks in the West Indies, and they weren't really thinking about the long-term aspects of it. They could take their clients, to St. Lucia or Barbados or wherever, and have a good time of it. That you see that in a lot of the leagues, and so while we still have that with the ownership, you're going to probably lean towards more most of my time doing analysis when I'm talking to owners is talking them down from the most famous player again and again. That said, you're also getting a few people coming through who own teams who do understand finances and understand that what has happened in American sports and also in football, and realize that this is something that they can do. And it is happening. The biggest difference is that in a lot of those sports, we have a lot more access to a lot of the data, or we have a lot more data to begin with. So, if you play 30 to 35 T20 games a year, that's quite a lot of T20 cricket to play in 1 year. Whereas obviously in baseball, you're looking at 160, and in basketball, you're looking at 82, right? So you're looking at a big difference straight away in the amount of data that we can collect. Then we have the fact that outside of CricViz, no one really, or very few people have access to Hawkeye data, right? That gives you a ball-by-ball data, the sort of stuff that I use a lot, is really, really great, and it does incredible things. Hawkeye data is the next level up, right? And it really is a huge step up. And, you can see with some of the videos where, the Akshar Patel video, and I did something on the slower balls of bowlers, the level of detail and the information that we have there, that is what owners really should be using more than the ball-by-ball data. You can match that with the ball-by-ball data, of course. The ball-by-ball data is always going to be very, very important. But then to be able to get the next level and really understand why this person is successful and where they're successful would then help you work out if they're going to be successful in your franchise or your league. And that information is still not that widely available. And while it's not that widely available, we go with ball-by-ball data. And ball-by-ball data can be, put it this way, I don't think anyone in the world in the last 5 years has faced 200 balls of left arm wrist spin, right? I don't know if anyone's faced 150 or even 100. I'm trying to remember the number. I know I did it in a video not that long ago, maybe the Ben Dunk video. No one faces it, right? And so we know that left arm wrist spin has an advantage, but we don't know who it has an advantage over, right? So you might pick a left arm wrist spinner and you might play them in the first game and that team absolutely hammers them and you had no idea because no one had ever faced enough balls for you to have a good thing. So those sorts of things make it a lot harder for us in cricket to be able to use that sort of stuff. But your basic point is right, and it is happening, mate. It's just probably not happening at the rate that it should be happening, and it's being held back a little bit.
No, I get you. Thanks, mate.
No worries. Thanks for your question, Baska. Baska, you there? Oh, there he is.
Yeah. Yeah, so you talked about the Pakistan series and what the odds are stacking up. But looking at Australia, what do you think will maximize the chances of winning the match with their three-pace bowlers, or they should go and give Swepson a debut because Pakistan pitches and leg spin, we know that nobody plays them that well. So would you be going for a leg spinner, being a leg spinner yourself? And then if that, then how would you change the team combination?
Look, I think that is really pitch dependent, isn't it? Like, I can't answer that for you now just because you haven't seen the pitches yet. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. I'd be shocked if Swepson didn't play a test because they have, I was almost going to say Bancroft, but not Bancroft, but because they have now a bowling all-rounder in the middle overs. I think that, in the middle order, who bowls seam, I think that gives them the option to do that. And you would assume that probably one of Hazelwood or Stark would miss out. If it's only one test, again, you probably have to look at the pitch and work out if you think there's going to be any movement in off the pitch. Probably Hazelwood misses out. If you think it's going to be quite a flat pitch, but the ball might rough up, then obviously maybe Mitchell Starc is your better option of missing out there. But because they do have that, that middle order backup, then I can see them doing that. I'm not sure that's going to be plan A, though. I think plan A is probably going to be going in with their 4 best bowlers and their all-rounder. But to be honest, I haven't really been chatting to the team much at all, so I don't really know what their thoughts are. But my last conversation was, I felt like they were a little bit, not confused, but a little bit unsure of exactly what they were going to come up against. And I think someone was talking about that before. I think that's pretty much how we've seen this series so far.
Yeah. So the thing is that because Australia, as you said, has not done well, not you said it, they have not done well overseas. Wouldn't it be like with Langer going and McDonald coming in? Wouldn't there'll be some radical thinking coming in, or is it just like they will just go with Cummins and have a steady lineup?
Well, so traditionally Australia would throw in a second spinner, right? So the radical thinking usually would be to go with your normal bowling lineup. That would be the more radical thing. Australia can usually just throws in a second spinner, even if that second spinner isn't particularly good enough. So the more radical thing really is to go with their normal bowling lineup. I don't know. As I said, I haven't been chatting to anyone. If I was on the tour, you bump into people and you chat a bit more. And honestly, I've been half expecting Australia just to pull out at the last minute anyway, because that's kind of what they do. So I haven't been focusing on it as much. So I haven't been talking to anyone over there. But my guess is that I would have thought that they're de facto in this particular situation, being that Pakistan pitches aren't the same as Indian or Sri Lankan or the UAE. They might go in with the extra seamers based on the fact that they have a 5-man attack. And so it's not like their 3 seamers should be worked completely to the bone. But I don't know is the best answer. But thanks for your questions. All right, last question is from Shamana.
Hi. So, could you tell me how the ICC rankings work, really?
Sorry.
Yeah, especially the T20 rankings, because Virat Kohli, I think, just exited the rankings, and I guess Aaron Finch has been there since forever, and also Owen Morgan. There's something called an all-time ranking. Owen Morgan is on there, and I think McCullum is on there. So what is that? What ranking is that?
I'll start with all-time ranking. All-time ranking is your peak score. So you get ranked based on your individual score at any one time. And the all-time rankings, from my memory, I haven't been on because the rankings are nonsense, so I don't care about them. But my memory is that they're from your absolute peak score. So when you have your highest score. The reason that the rankings are nonsense in T20 cricket specifically is because they don't fully account for strike rate in the way that strike rate actually impacts T20 games. Also, no one plays enough T20 internationals, and when you do, you very rarely go up against full strength teams because everyone's resting and rotating or trying new players. There isn't enough T20 games. So Dawid Malan was the world's #1 ranked T20 batter, and he played like 19 games. How can you be the best at the world at something if you've only done it 19 times? It's ridiculous. And if you would have used his domestic numbers, he probably wouldn't have been in the top 25 players in the world, or 25 batters in the world. So it's quite I don't know if the best way to say it is, it's an old model. It's a bit like DLS in that DLS doesn't particularly work very well for T20 cricket either. And I think that's certainly the case with the rankings. But even the one-day rankings, they tend to focus more on averages and runs than they do on strike rate, which doesn't make sense because it really is the combination of the two that gives you the biggest impact. Separate to that, they're very bad for the all-rounders as well. You get like, well, these days Mitchell Starc deserves being in the all-rounders list, maybe in test matches, but like even 5-6 years ago when Mitchell Starc wasn't a very good batter, he'd be like the 5th best test all-rounder in the world. And you'd be like, well, he's quite clearly not. Australia's batting him at 9. I think with that, you certainly have situations where you got to remember, it doesn't matter. The two things that people seem to get the most, people seem to get really upset about when it comes to the ICC are the rankings and the player of the match. They're both entirely meaningless, right? There are 22 players who play in a cricket game, and 3 of them could have the absolute best game of their life, and only one of them gets man of the match or player of the match. And then the next game, no one has that particularly good a game, but someone's okay and they get it. It's a completely meaningless thing. And yet people completely fixate it. And the same with these rankings. I remember looking at the all-time ODI rankings of batting. I think David Gower was really high up on that list. David Gower had a pretty ordinary ODI record. He was fine for an 80s player. He's certainly not in one of the best players of all time, but he happened to go on a period where I think he smashed the Australians everywhere. I think it was the Australians over a few games. And obviously he got this incredibly high ranking. He's obviously not in the best ODI players of all time. He's probably not even in England's best ODI players of all time. He struggled to get in the top 15 of their best ever team. So it's a very, very flawed system. It doesn't use advanced metrics at all, as far as I'm aware. And it's a very old-fashioned way of looking at players. Even to the point of which I would say that the actual rankings for test matches, one days, and T20s, when you look at teams, is quite flawed as well. We know it's harder to win away from home than at home, but there's nothing within the system to be able to do that. Consistently, when it came to rankings as well, you would get the same amount of points that you for a dead rubber ODI at the end of a 7-match series where the other team was already 6-0 up, as you would for winning a World Cup final. They're not equal difficulty. So I certainly think that the rankings needs to be upended, but I don't care enough to make a point about it. Does that make sense? If you go back to, I did do a video on Dawid Malan. It is worth having a look at it. Yeah. So, I mean, in that I talk about it. That's about the most you'll ever hear me talk about it. Look, I don't know Dawid Malan, but I love Tabrez Shamsi, and, he's been on my podcast before, and, it seems like a really, really lovely guy. I don't want to make fun of the fact that he's the #1 ranked T20 bowler in the world, but if he's the #1 ranked T20 bowler in the world, he would be a first choice IPL bowler, right? And he's not. And that's not to say he's rubbish, but it tells you that the rankings are kind of bullshit, is maybe the best word to use.
So how the ICC rankings work? They don't.
I would say they don't. Yeah, I think I've never gone through them just because I have had brief looks at them before. I know for a fact that the T20 model is terrible. I know for a fact that the one-day model is quite poor. I've got a feeling that Alistair Cook's got a really high ranking on the all-time one-day list as well. And I remember I might have tweeted that once. He might have had a similar ranking to Herschel Gibbs. No one in the world thought Alistair Cook was a better one-day player than Herschel Gibbs. So it's very flawed. I haven't looked at the bowlers ones as much, but I certainly have of the batting. The bowling one might actually be better. But it doesn't factor in what period of the game that you do things, right? So it's automatically going to favour top order batters in T20 cricket and one day cricket over middle order batters because of the way that the game moves, and that's again nonsensical. The same. It's probably going to. My guess is that it favours bowlers in T20 cricket who bowl in the middle overs because it's always the spinners who are the most highly ranked. Whereas Shaheen Afridi, other than Rashid Khan, Shaheen Afridi might be the second best. Or him and Bumrah might be. Oh, he's probably even a better power play bowler than Bumrah. Shaheen Afridi might be the second best bowler in the world. I don't think he's ever been #1 in the T20 bowling rankings. I could be wrong. So again, it doesn't really make any sense to me. But it doesn't matter because it's got no consequence. That it's all it only exists so that people can moan about it. So there'll be more articles about it. Right? It's not a real thing. If they were really to do it properly, I would probably moan about it more myself. I'd get involved, but they don't care about it. And so it's nice when the player, especially when it's a random player, gets to go to the top. Because I do think, for someone like Tabrez Shamsi, who didn't always get pushed in South African cricket and struggled to get the major franchise jobs that he probably should have got. I think it's a really cool thing for him to do. And also for someone like Dawid Malan, who was a late bloomer, explodes at the international level far better than he ever did at domestic level. Like what a moment it is for people like that. But so neither of them are. Rashid Khan and AB de Villiers are better than them. AB de Villiers doesn't play international cricket, so he's not the number one ranking, and Rashid Khan didn't have the international numbers to compare to Brady Shamsi at that time, or who was it after Shamsi? Wasn't it? It was Hasaranga after him. Fine bowlers, but if they're really the best bowlers in the world, they would have played a lot more IPL by this point. And I think I remember, in fact, the Punjab fans going nuts about, oh, we've got the world's number one batter on the bench. So if he was really the world's number one batter, he wouldn't be on the bench, right? Unless he was going through a dip. So yeah, they're not for me. It's maybe the best way of putting it.
Well, thanks.
No worries. Thanks so much for your question. So I'm going to have to leave because I've got to go do something now. But thanks to everyone who asked some questions. Obviously, a huge shout out again to the sponsors, Manscaped, 20% off if you put in the code REDINKA when you're at checkout there. You get free worldwide shipping. You don't have to get, you don't have to get the Lawnmower 4.0. You perhaps you could get something a T-shirt that says Manscaped, the testicle perfume that they sell. They probably don't call it testicle perfume, do they? But whatever they call it, it's like, I don't know. It's got another name. Sorry, Manscaped. It smells lovely. My producer Muku tells me it's the nicest smelling thing he's ever used on his body. That might say more about Muku than anything else, if we're being completely honest. But big shout out to them. Bodyline T-shirts as well. Also, the Buy Me a Coffee crowd, and specifically a Patreon. As I said before, this podcast exists because of Patreon. If we can get to our stretch goals on Patreon, what we would look at doing is bringing in a third podcast. We're obviously talking to advertisers and partners about that as well. But at the moment, there's absolutely nothing stopping me doing a third podcast other than the fact that we need the money. But thank you so much to everyone who came into Spotify Green Room. Remember, if you come into Spotify Green Room, you can get notifications by following me directly there, and then you'll be told whenever we do them. But we do send them out on other places as well. But thanks to everyone for coming into this podcast and everyone who listened to it on the Reading Inca feed and also on YouTube. See you next time.